Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Twisted Talks. I'm Josh.
I'm Tanya.
So we are still on the case of the Bhopal Disaster or Gas Tragedy. This is part 3. She a big one.
We're hoping that this will be the last part, but honestly,
It could be. There could be a part 4. We don't know
we
either.
don't know. You'll
We're
find
just
out
as
when
in
we
the
do.
know as you. So far, obviously, we've covered the majority of the information in terms of leaks before the main disaster, the actual main disaster, how the MIC was stored, background information, company information,
We covered all of that.
healthcare, long-term and short-term effects, and gas cloud composition, immediate aftermath, everything like that. So if you are tuning in and you haven't listened to part 1 or part 2, I highly suggest you go back and listen from part 1 and listen in order. Because
otherwise you
there's a
won't know
lot
what's
and you
going
will be
on.
confusion.
So,
But yeah, with that, I'm going to jump back in, and we're starting back in with the environmental rehabilitation with Tanya.
Yes. So between 1985 and 1986, the Union Carbide plant was in the process of being shut down. Pipes, drums and tanks that were used for production were cleaned with water and a chemical decontaminant before being sold to entrepreneurs. But the MIC and 7 plants are both still there, as well as the control room and a storage area of different chemicals and residues. The isolation materials have long since fallen down, and in 1997, the Minister for Culture suggested turning the site into an amusement park. An amusement park.
No.
An amusement park. He wanted to turn this into... Yeah.
I can imagine that anyone who heard that was less than amused.
Yeah, so 1, bad taste. 2, highly toxic environment. And 3, are you stupid?
And 4, all of the above all at once.
So obviously there were several protests against this idea, which ultimately led to the proposal being withdrawn. The victims' organisation has campaigned for a memorial at the
Yeah,
site.
how about cleaning the site up properly first?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
That'd be a really good
That
start.
would be just chef's kiss, like top notch. Well done, good job. So the area surrounding the plant was used to dump hazardous chemicals between 1969 and 1977. They were using an open pit near the eastern wall of the factory, and they were legit just like dumping dangerous and hazardous chemicals and materials in a hole, and we're like, yeah, that's grand.
Throw a bit of soil on it, it's all good.
Works perfect. Now, after 1977, they started to use 2 lime pits that would be neutralised with hydrochloric acid, and from here, the so-called effluents would flow to...
What's effluents?
Like the runoff, the toxic materials.
Oh yeah, the shit.
Yeah, so then the effluents would flow to 2 evaporation ponds, one behind and one outside the factory. These ponds were lined with polythene to prevent seepage, but when it would rain, the ponds would overflow and the seepage, I suppose, would enter the sewage lines that passed through JP Nagar, which is the village that I mentioned in the previous episode when I was talking about the long-term health effects. In 1989, UC's own tests proved that soil and water samples... Now, this is their, like, United...
I totally trust Union
Carbide.
Carbide.
But this is what their test showed. Their tests proved that soil and water samples collected near the factory were highly toxic to fish. This report also noted that 21 sites inside the plant were highly polluted, and samples taken in June and July of 1989 from landfill areas and effluent treatment pits showed contamination levels ranging from 10% to 100%, with things like alpha-naphthol and...
Wait, what was ranging from 10 to 100%?
The contamination levels.
Okay.
Contaminated with things like naphthol and or 7 in much higher quantities than what was permitted for on-land disposal. All of these samples, when tested with fish, killed the fish. Like, they were highly toxic.
But, like, I'm not trying to be funny, but could you not figure that one out using just the fact of what the levels are? Why you gotta go kill more fish?
Yeah. Fucking idiots. So, analysis undertaken in 1990 at the Citizens Environmental Laboratory in Boston showed toxic chemicals were present in the surroundings of the plant. In 1991, the State Research Laboratory of the Public Health Engineering Department, that's such a long name, reported several instances of
Chemical contamination.
Yes, thank you. Several instances of chemical contamination.
Chemical
contamination in samples taken from 11 tube wells in the area of the plant. And now I believe tube wells are like the water pumps for the villages.
Excuse me?
You just wait. They repeated this in 1996 and found the same results. The municipal authorities declared at the time that the water was unsafe for drinking from over 100 of these tube wells, but did nothing to provide access to safe water.
So basically drink this to dehydrate. Take the risk.
In 1994, a collaborative investigation was done with a UCC paid company and an Indian government agency. The findings are still confidential, but it is known that they discovered that 21% of the plant premises were still seriously contaminated 10 years later with chemicals, and a more thorough investigation was recommended. A total of 44 tonnes of tarry residue and 2.5 tonnes of alpha naphthol were found and moved to a covered area. Throughout the 90s, various companies and labs investigated the Union Carbide site and found more and more contamination. And in addition to all of this, vegetables grown in the surrounding areas were tested between 1999 and 2002 and were shown to be contaminated with heavy metals like mercury, chromium, copper, nickel, and lead.
After everyone had been told it was safe to work away with everything, yet the government and the high up bureaucrats were still getting outside food brought in. I wonder, did they know it all along?
And as well as this, toxic organochlorines, hexachlorothane, hexalorobutadiene, pesticides, volatile organic compounds, and haloorganics were found in this food.
So nothing good.
These same contaminants were also found in breast milk.
Because obviously if the mother's supposed to and consuming it.
Yeah. So not only...
how did they go about that? How did they just go up to people and be like, hi, can I test your titty?
Well, I suppose they would have been included in other surveys and...
I mean, yeah, but a survey like yes, no, tick the box is different from...
No, but
my tit juice.
I mean like health surveys, like actually investigating their health.
More like a case study.
Case studies. So not only were people consuming these highly toxic compounds in their food, they were also unknowingly passing it to their babies and young children via breast milk. And I had seen as well that a lot of women suffered with lactation issues. So I would imagine,
saw a quick brief thing
like
something
I
read
would
about
imagine
that
for
too.
these women, if they were able to lactate and produce breast milk, that was probably something that they were almost very pleased about and very proud of. And then to find out that they were actually poisoning their babies, like it must have been absolutely fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So under the original lease agreement, Union Carbide was supposed to be responsible for cleaning the factory site before handing it back over to the government. But they violated this agreement by abandoning it after the disaster and leaving a literal shit ton of dangerous and toxic chemicals lying around.
Just chilling.
Now, eventually, in order to provide safe drinking water in and around the site, a scheme was sanctioned covering 10 of the affected communities by the local municipal authorities. By 2002, there were many new water towers spread out over Bhopal. And with the water in the lakes continuously sinking, the plan is to lead in water from nearby rivers. But as far as I know, they haven't selected what river they're going to do that with yet.
Yeah, because as far as I could even see, like in terms of clean up, there still hasn't been a proper one.
No, there hasn't. The government of Madhya Pradesh has put together a list of rehabilitation measures such as new water pumps and tree planting, but the money meant for improving the lives of those affected by the leak supposedly went on road resurfacing, planting of trees and construction of drains in areas that were either not affected or only minorly affected by the leak. Many of the pumps are said to be unusable after the roadworks, and the water is also said to be contaminated by sewage drains. So really, intentions were set, promises were made, and nothing was
And
delivered
they were
to
intentionally
people.
not delivered.
Yeah, like
that money wasn't even meant to be for that kind of thing.
No, not even a little bit like.
That's ridiculous.
So that's what I have on
Fuck's sake.
environmental rehabilitation.
And then we're moving on to kind of occupational and habitation rehabilitation. So
Sorry, say that again.
Occupational and habitation rehabilitation.
Okay, occupational and habitational rehabilitational. I know I said that totally wrong. Thank you.
The Special Training and Employment Programme for the Urban Poor, STEP UP for short.
Stop it.
Yeah, I'm like...
Step up to the streets.
Yeah, No. Was a scheme that was used for the gas victims. This programme was to learn new or further progress skills in appropriate trades such as sewing, stitching and the production of stationery items. There must be a demand for pencils.
There must have been.
As well as learning these skills, the grant... Oh, hello microphone. She said yeet.
Yeet. Skirt. Yeet.
Oh yeah, so as well as learning these skills, or I suppose upscaling skills they may have already had, the grant of a loan would be given for them to undertake self-employment.
Okay.
So 50 work sheds were to be built, however only 33 of the work sheds were ever started up, but by 1992 all but one of these work sheds has closed down.
Fantastic.
Yeah. In 1986, the MP government invested, and obviously I know that's terminology that's also used in the UK, but I'm on about the Indian MP government.
The Madhya Pradesh government.
I think it's, it could be, but there's another word for MP as well.
It's
MP government is like magistrates, something, government. I can't remember, I googled it.
Magistrates, proctor.
But anyway, I can't remember. It could be either that or the other thing or both, but I can't remember what I found out that it stood for. So they invested 8 million rupees into the special industrial area Bhopal. It was planned that here there would be 170 to 200 work sheds and common facilities such as a tool room, postal services, a dispensary and a communication centre. This was intended to provide employment for 10,000 people, and vocational training was also planned for about 3,600 people per year. 152 work sheds ended up being built out of the planned 170 to 200.
So
and
they're under-delivering.
They're under-delivering on everything. And after a few years, parts of the area were rented out to private enterprises so long as they hired gas victims. So I'm like, okay. By 2000, work sheds were partially functioning. It was estimated that 50,000 people needed alternative jobs and that less than 100 of the gas victims had found regular employment under the government scheme. The government also planned to provide 2,486 flats in 2- and 4-storey buildings outside Bhopal called the Widows' Colony.
Beautiful.
That's what that's referred to as.
Lovely.
I don't know whether that's the government name or whether that's just a name that's given, you know. However, the water in these flats did not reach the upper levels, and it was not possible to keep cattle, which was the primary occupation of many living there. Things like buses and schools, etc., were missing for at least 10 years.
Fantastic.
So, and also, I'm kind of wondering then, I'm like, was that water also contaminated? So, like,
Probably.
not only could it reach them, but the people it could reach were getting poisoned.
Yeah, probably.
Like, really great job.
So
like,
excellent.
fair enough, the government aren't to blame for what happened, but they're really, really, really lacking on everything in terms of dealing with the aftermath.
Yes.
and everything, full stop. Under-delivering what they're delivering isn't good enough anyway.
Yeah, and even, like, accepting that settlement, that was not enough to cover
exactly
everyone who was affected.
But then again, I assume that accepting that settlement can only be at the discretion and blame of the judge in that case. I'm assuming there was probably governmental influences, obviously.
It was a settlement that was set up between the Indian government and UCC because the Indian government were the representatives of all the victims.
Yeah, but I mean, the one who approved it was the judge.
The judge, yeah. He definitely had a hand in it. It was all
like, if I was the judge, I would have turned
One of
around
them,
and
three
said,
of
no,
them.
not enough.
Yeah. We demand the 3.3 billion.
Or if not that much, more than fucking 490 million anyway.
70.
470. See? I'm even upping it. Unknowns to myself. 470 is not enough at all. But yes, that is that section. It's quite a short and sweet one.
Okay, so moving on to economic rehabilitation. So in the years following the disaster, as people began to try adjusting to lives riddled with health issues and PTSD, people were unable to work and women bore a large burden as many had been abandoned by their husbands or had lost their husbands the night of the leak. They became ostracised and loan sharks preyed on a number of people affected who were simply trying to stay afloat.
Loan sharks be sharking.
Yeah, be a loan shark. Economic losses after the disaster include loss of jobs, loss of earning capacity for the victims, business disruptions, the cost of compensation and rehabilitation and legal costs. The UCIL plant, which was an investment to the tune of $25 million, was shut down immediately, costing 650 people their jobs.
Wait, what was shut down?
The it was referred to in this as the UCIL plant.
Oh,
but
yeah, the
Union,
plant.
Yeah, so
yeah.
the Union Carbide plant. and a few months later, the Union Carbide Research and Development Centre was cut back to a skeleton staff, eliminating more jobs. Local businesses and state government offices were shut down for 3 weeks, losing business and tax revenues, and the evacuations disrupted commercial activities for weeks, and as a result, business losses during this time are estimated at $8.65 million.
Losses of that much money?
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
So that's like the total.
The total...
Like the total...
Oh, the total of the losses
Yeah.
in that time frame?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then, in the first year after the incident, many well-intended steps were taken for relief for victims. Compensation.
I feel like it's already important that the words well-intended are there.
Yeah.
That's enough. Like.
So compensation of around $800 per fatality was paid to relatives and family members.
That's a fucking... Okay,
Yeah.
now I'm pretty sure, especially back then, I'm not sure about now, I know India is like a poorer country, or was a poorer country. So I know that, like, even because, like, at first when I was doing the research and I was seeing some of the fines, I was like, that seems like not a lot of money. But in a country like that, at the
Especially
time
back in
anyway,
the
it was.
80s.
So I'm like, maybe that's obviously more money back then,
Yeah.
but that's still
A
fucking
lot, like,
ridiculous.
it's not a lot.
That is not enough.
And as well, as you said, like, a lot of people weren't able to prove that they had lost people. So a lot of
And it
people
was
got
American
nothing.
money they were getting.
Yeah.
Like obviously I know they were probably getting it in rupees, but what I meant by
Yeah.
that was like
Well, I
the
have
settlement
American.
was in dollars.
Yeah.
So like, why didn't they take a substantial amount to like compensate people as if they were in America, the way an American company would like pay out to American citizens on American soil?
Yeah.
$800 for a fucking life.
Yeah. And then 20,000 victims received small cash compensation of around $100. And 3,000 more people were given part-time employment. And apparently new schools were opened in the affected areas. But as you said earlier, it was 10 years.
Yeah, in like
before,
that in that widows colony section,
like
it was
this
a long
10 years
time.
later,
Like,
they were finally getting new schools. But sadly, these relief efforts were far too small scale for the amount of people who were affected.
yeah.
In March 1991, new interim relief payments were made to victims. They received 200 rupees or $8 a month, and a total of $260 million was dispersed amongst the victims who lived in 37 of the 54 affected wards. But some people who lived in the wards had actually moved in after the incident, so they were being compensated for nothing.
Because they weren't involved.
Well, I mean, they probably did feel effects from living in
Potentially,
the
yeah.
area afterwards, but they weren't involved. They weren't affected by the actual night
They
that it
weren't
happened.
considered necessarily like immediate victim or anything
And
like
then
that.
there would have been people who moved out
And like
that
I
weren't
suppose,
compensated
unless
at
there
all.
was what's the word?
Extenuating circumstances.
Unless there was extenuating circumstances for their reason to move there, which is fair if there was. But if there was no reason, just the fact they chose to move there, you knew what you were moving
Exactly.
into. And if you didn't, you must have been living under a rock.
Exactly. And this injection of cash flow actually caused the local inflation rate to jump to between 15 and 20%. The $470 million paid by Union Carbide Corporation in the settlement agreement had remained in a court-administered account until 1992 while the claims were being sorted out. By early 1993, there were 630,000 claims, and only 350,000 had been proven through medical records and documents, and hundreds more victims continued to die during the process of claims being substantiated.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's...
So like
There wasn't really much
they didn't have enough
renegotiation.
money as it was, and then even with people passing away while waiting that long, they still didn't even have enough money.
Yeah.
Like, what a fucking joke.
It's a piss take.
And like where you said about the $8 a fucking month,
$8
I
a
don't
month.
give a shit what the difference is in the economy and how
That's-
poor they might
that's
have been
an
then.
obscene-
That is still not enough. I don't care if that $8 a month is the equivalent to fucking €800 a month. Not enough.
No,
not good enough.
No, it's not good enough. Like, they deserved a hell of a lot more.
Even if it wasn't a monthly payment, they should have just even been given like one gigantic lump sum each,
Yeah.
and do with it what you will, over however length of time you choose
The
to
whole
spend
situation is just ridiculous. Like, it was handled so
it in. It's one
poorly.
shit show after another.
Yeah.
And whether it's fucking UCC, obviously at the root of it, what happened, but like the government really didn't help themselves either at all in any way, shape or form. Every fucking attempt, the word that comes to mind is futile.
Yeah, it's futile. It is.
Yeah,
it's your turn.
So, Moving on to like other impacts it had and kind of causes. So I'm just kind of listing the main arguments, really, not getting into them until after that. So in 1985, Californian Democrat Henry Waxman called for a U.S. government inquiry into the Bhopal disaster, and this ended up resulting in U.S. legislation regarding the accidental release of toxic chemicals in the U.S.
Oh, but what about India?
What about them?
What about the other countries you're working in?
No, not their problem.
Oh, sorry, not working in, operating in.
Operating in, yeah. Under subsidiary, so that you don't end up having to actually take account of your actions to the fullest extent of the law.
Exactly, there was no accountability.
So there are two main arguments surrounding the cause of the disaster and who was to blame. First one, which Tanya will cover next, is the corporate negligence. That is next,
corporate
isn't it?
negligence, yeah.
Is the corporate negligence argument. So pointing to a combination of under-maintained facilities, decaying facilities, shit attitude towards safety, workforce that weren't trained properly, things like that. And then obviously that combination leading to workers' actions accidentally allowing this water supposedly to get into the MIC tanks due to the absence of sufficiently functioning safeguards, which you mentioned a lot of earlier as well. And like there was a lot of, I don't get that either, because there seemed to be a fair amount, not a lot, but a fair amount of safeguards in place. They were just like, this is broken, we're not going to fix it, this is on standby, we don't need that, when's anything going to go wrong? It was just stupidity.
It was all cost cutting.
Yeah.
It wasn't even stupidity, it was greed.
Greed, yeah.
It was corporate greed.
And lack of training.
Yeah.
The second, which I'll cover after Tanya covers our corporate negligence, is worker sabotage argument, which is the argument that Union Carbide have put forward and backed on numerous occasions. It is argued that it wasn't physically possible for the water to get into the tank without human effort. It claims that extensive testimony and engineering analysis leads to the conclusion that an employee intentionally connected a water hose to an empty valve on the side of the tank. It also argues that the Indian government took extensive actions to hide the possibility of worker sabotage so that they could attach the blame to Union Carbide Corporation solely. There are different theories on how the water entered the tanks. The workers maintained that the water got into the tank via the plant's piping system during the cleaning of the lines, as you said earlier, and that this was possible as a slip line wasn't used. As well as that, the downstream bleeder lines are partially blocked, numerous valves are leaking, and the tank was not pressurised, which was common knowledge to everyone at that time. The water carried with it iron rust fillings from the walls of corroding pipes, residue of salt compounds that had blocked the lines being washed, and other contaminants. Seeing as the water was not draining properly through the bleeder valves, may have built up in the pipes and eventually rose high enough to flow back down through another series of pipelines into the MIC storage tank. However, Union Carbide claimed that this was not possible, as for the water to reach the MIC tank during cleaning, it would have had to have travelled through dozens of metres of piping, go through multiple valves, and then climb 3.5 metres in height to reach the opening of the tank. According to the UC team, for the water to enter tank E610 from this cleaning, it would have required simultaneous leaks through several valves that reportedly closed. Now, to be honest, going by the fucking descriptions and the fucking shit show that is UCC, it wouldn't surprise me if there was simultaneous leaks.
Honestly, same.
However, it is pointed out by some that inadequate maintenance would allow the water to pass through valves even if they're closed due to them malfunctioning. Regardless of all the ways the water could have entered the tank, UCC strongly stand by employee sabotage as the blame, but of course they would, because it's either blame someone else or take the blame.
Exactly, and they're not going to take accountability at this point.
No, clearly not.
So, as Josh said, the corporate negligence view is the argument that the disaster was caused by corporate negligence due to underinvestment in safety, which led to a dangerous working environment. So from 1977 to 1982, the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal was actually being managed by an American engineer, and he had one very strict principle for the place, and it was, quote, always keep only a strict minimum of dangerous materials on site. It's a good principle.
It makes sense. At least someone's thinking.
And he was also supposedly very good with safety procedures and things like that. But then in 1982, he gets replaced by an Indian-born, American-educated engineer.
Okay, American-educated means he probably does know about the MIC and everything, so that's good. And it's giving someone from there.
When they brought in this new engineer, they made him subject to a financial controller who they had brought in to help the factory reduce financial losses.
Here
and like when I say
go.
Subject to, I mean there was a hierarchy, and this financial controller was above the manager.
Yeah. Because, again, money is all that matters.
Yeah, and so even if the manager had wanted to implement new safety procedures and whatever, the financial controller
It would have to be handed up to make sure that
would
it
have
can
said,
be
no,
approved
absolutely
financially.
not, it's going to cost too much money.
Yeah.
So in the beginning,
even though financial controller probably, I'd assume, would know nothing about MIC and all of that, they just know money.
It would just be about costs, yeah.
Fucking ridiculous.
So in the beginning, you had to be either a graduate in science or have a diploma in mechanical or chemical engineering to be an operator at the plant. But by 1982, most of the original operators had resigned from UCIL due to changes in the staffing policy, or from Union Carbide. The training period to be an operator was 6 months, but a former worker described how he was offered a job in the methyl isocyanate plant, which was known among the workers to be the most dangerous part of the factory. He said he had received a paper about his 6 months of training, but after 5 weeks, he was asked to stop the training and start working as a fully fledged plant operator.
Even though he hadn't completed his training yet.
Yes, and when he objected to this, he was given another 3 weeks of training. So out of 6 months training, he got 8 weeks. That's what they did. They cut down.
He got 1/3
They
of what he
cut
was
down
supposed to get.
6 months of training to 8 weeks because I assume it cost less for them. So yeah, so the workers were speaking up about safety issues and the lack of training because contract workers were being sent in without safety equipment to do dangerous jobs that should have been done by machines, and they were all having exposures to things like methyl isocyanate, carbon tetrachloride, trimethylamine, alpha naphthol and carbaryl dust, and it was rare that they would have the recommended safety equipment. In 1983 and 1984, there was layoffs to cut costs. They encouraged a number of workers to take early retirement, and around 300 of their temporary workers got laid off, and they shunted another 150 workers into like a pool to be picked from and assigned jobs as needed. Operating shifts were cut from 12 shifts to 6, and maintenance shifts were cut from 6 shifts to 2 shifts.
Oh, for God's sake.
Yep.
As if maintenance is fucking important, guys.
Yeah. Employees were often given jobs that they were not at all qualified to do, and if they refused, their salary was reduced. The second and third shift maintenance supervisor had been gotten rid of only a few days before the disaster actually happened. On the night of the disaster, there were no trained engineers on site, and the production supervisor who was on duty had only been transferred in a month prior.
So was probably still getting his bearings.
From a carbide battery plant. The workers were examined by the plant's doctor every 6 months. This included a blood and urine test, but they never received their own test results. And the UCIL management advised them to develop resistance against the toxic substances.
Excuse me?
By drinking 6 or 7 glasses of milk a day and eating a high-protein diet of fish and eggs.
What's that going to do?
Apparently it's going to build resistance to
calcium.
So I have a little list here of all the issues with their safety systems and their management. So I suppose I'll just dive straight in. Tank E610 was filled well above the recommended level of 60%. It was filled to between 75 and 87%.
And what makes it even worse is, I don't know which one is which, in the sense of one of them has to be wrong. But like then the research I had said it wasn't even supposed to be filled over 50, let alone 60.
So we'll say it's meant to be filled 50
it's either
60%.
25 to 35. It's 25 to 35% over capacity,
over
safe levels.
Tank E619 was not kept empty for emergency needs as it should have been. Tank E619 was also not kept under pressure. Tank E610 could not be pressurised on October 21st, November 26th and 30th, as well as December 1st, as we mentioned earlier, and this was never investigated. And as well as this, the level indicator, or LI, was faulty. Tank temperatures were being logged too far apart, and there was no column for it in the logbook. The recommended rule of checking temperatures every hour was rewritten to every 2 hours. The rule on temperature was changed to allow for the MIC refrigeration system to be shut down. The temperature of the MIC was not logged the night of the disaster. There was an alarm that should have gone off in the event of an abnormal rise in temperature from 15 degrees Celsius in the tanks, but it had been disconnected with literal years. The refrigeration unit had been shut down, as I mentioned earlier, and the Freon had been removed. Safety specs were rewritten to allow the vent gas scrubber to be shut down when the plant was not in operation. So that period of time where the plant was shut down for maintenance, they switched the vent gas scrubber to standby mode.
But didn't turn it back on.
Yeah. The caustic soda feed to the vent gas scrubber was modified from continuous process to batch. So it was designed for continuous process, but it was switched to batch process.
Which is...
basically, rather than, instead of having a continuous...
all the time.
Yeah, it was turned on in batches.
So turned on when they wanted it, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
The VGS had been moved to standby mode on October 23rd, 1984, after the MIC unit was shut down with a total of 83 tonnes of MIC in tanks E610 and E611. It returning to operating mode was dependent on the operator who was there that night knowing that it was in standby mode or realising that it was in standby mode and going into the unit to ensure that it started circulating, and he did not do this. So he either wasn't aware that it was in standby mode or didn't know enough to check that it wasn't in standby mode. The emergency water flares backup, which is supposed to be set all the time to make sure that the pilot light stays on, was discontinued to save money. On November 25th, a section of corroded pipe had been taken out for maintenance work, and a replacement pipe could have been prepared and should have only taken 4 hours to install, but they never did this.
Which pipe was that?
The pipe to the emergency water flare that would have killed off the gas as it was coming out.
Okay.
I think it might have been called something else in the last few episodes, but it was a flare, basically.
The gas flare?
A flare tower.
Yeah. Oh, the one I mentioned earlier as well. Yeah.
So we've mentioned it a few
because
times.
they did take it away because of a corroding.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I was wondering when I was doing it.
Would they not
I was
have made an interim pipeline?
Yeah, exactly.
There are no records of any analysis of tank E610 after October 19th. The siren had been disconnected from the alarm so that operators could warn only the workmen without, quote, unnecessarily alarming residents nearby.
Because them being alarmed totally would have been unnecessary. Oh, definitely.
Yep. A design modification made in 1983 and or 1984 provided a route for the water to enter the MIC tank E610, or potentially provided a route. Lines were corroded, malfunctioning valves weren't being replaced, faulty gauges weren't being repaired. All the signs and manuals were in English, despite most of the workforce speaking Hindi. And lads, I could honestly go on for a lot more, but I didn't understand some of it, so feel free to have a look yourselves. This is just all the relevant information that I could find and that I could comprehend enough to explain.
Yes.
There is a shit ton more.
But it's the same with nearly every section. The majority of the sections, there is more there.
Yeah.
But even we're already on part 3.
Yeah.
And that's with trying to keep it some bit concise but informative and accurate.
Yeah.
So now in terms of safety auditing. Now, I can't remember if it's been mentioned yet or not. I think it might have been earlier in the case. But before I dive into this section covering safety audits, UCC did their own safety audits.
They did.
Now, that's not me placing judgment, but I've placed judgment everywhere else to do with them. But obviously, it's not uncommon for businesses to do their own safety audits in most lines of work anyway. Sometimes they outsource, but a lot of the time companies do it themselves. Because most companies that are, I suppose, efficient and ethical make sure their safety is up to scratch, both for their own sake as a company and for the sake of their employees.
Yeah.
But anyway, in the US and European UCC plants, safety audits were conducted annually. However, in other parts of the world, they did them every 2 years. I'm assuming it depends on regulations in the parts of the world as well, maybe. Or maybe it was just them being like, nah, don't care about them as much. But anyway, so prior to a quote-unquote business confidential safety audit by UCC in May of 1982, senior officials of the corporation were more than aware of a total of 61 hazards. 30 of them 30 of them major and 11 minor in the phosgene and methyl isocyanate units in Bhopal alone.
But they don't store phosgene. They came out and said they don't store phosgene.
Yeah.
You little liars.
So, but again, maybe it says phosgene / methyl isocyanate. So I suppose because it's in with it.
Yeah.
In this audit, it was shown that the performance of employees was below American standards. 10 major concerns were listed. The audit also expressed alarm at the poor state and inappropriate placement of safety equipment, and at the lack of regular checks to see if the instruments and alarm systems were functioning correctly. Concern was also expressed regarding the turnover of inadequately trained staff, unsatisfactory instruction methods, and a lack of diligence and rigour in maintenance reports. In line with corporate procedures, UCIL made an action plan in response to the audit and sent regular progress reports to the UCC in the United States until June of 1984, but UCC never sent a follow-up team to Bhopal in the 2.5 years between the audit and the accident. It is reported by workers that UCIL did temporarily fix many of the issues cited in the audit, but by the time of the disaster, conditions had deteriorated once again.
Of course.
In February of 1984, a safety audit of the UCC site in West Virginia raised serious concerns. That's what I kept singing in my head every time I saw it. But raised serious concerns, oh my back, that a runaway reaction could occur in one of the MIC unit storage tanks, and that there would be no way to prevent catastrophic failure of the tank if this reaction occurred. And obviously that was again through the audit of the West Virginia plant. Mm-hmm. But this warning was not passed on to UCIL or the Bhopal site, despite the main design of both being the same.
Because why would they?
Why would they do
bother?
that?
Why would they?
You would think they'd do it even to cover their own arses, even if they didn't give a flying fuck about the people or the employees. Would they not have at least done it for long-term financial reasons?
It's stupidity at its finest.
It is like they think all these decisions they're making are short-term financially beneficial decisions.
They weren't looking at the long-term at all.
But long-term,
it was greed.
It's
it was
not
utter greed.
It's going to cause deficits, not profits. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's that on the safety auditing. So now over to you.
So, as I said earlier, the corporate negligence view says that the disaster was a result of the corporate negligence, cutting costs, and a dangerous work environment, which led to a situation where workers were washing out the pipes and the water gets diverted due to a combination of bad maintenance, leaking, and clogging, and it finds its way into the methyl isocyanate tank E610, and we get a tragic disaster. Now, Union Carbide commissioned an analysis from Arthur D. Little, and he claims that the negligence argument is unfeasible for the following reasons. So reason number 1, the pipes used by the workers were only a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters in diameter and were not capable of producing enough hydraulic pressure to raise the water up to the 10-foot level needed to allow it to backflow into the MIC tank. Reason number 2, a key intermediate valve would have needed to be open, but it was tagged closed, meaning that it had been inspected and found to be closed. It is possible for open valves to clog over time, but the only way water can get through a closed valve is if there is leakage, and tests carried out by the Government of India in 1985 apparently found that this particular valve had no leak. And reason number 3, in order for the water to have reached the MIC tank from the pipe cleaning area, as Josh said earlier, it would have first had to flow through a large network of pipes ranging from 6 to 8 inches in diameter, before then rising 10 feet and flowing into the MIC tank. If this had happened, apparently most of the water that was in the pipes at the time the tank reached its critical reaction would have stayed in the pipes, as there was no drain for it. But again, an investigation by the Indian government in 1985 supposedly showed that the pipes were bone dry. Now, I know for a fact in episode 1 or 2 of this, I mentioned that when the pipes were opened afterwards, water was found inside them.
I can't remember.
I know I did. And I personally say that whether or not corporate negligence is the out-and-out cause of the disaster that night, there was clearly corporate negligence involved in the lead-up, and I personally...
Oh yeah, whether they want to personally, whether they want to actually full-on blame corporate negligence, or say it played a role, because it definitely had it was the main character.
It was the main character. Corporate negligence was the main bitch of this whole case. She really is that girl.
Yeah.
She really is that girl. So I think this is a kind of as good a place as any to tie off this episode, because we do still have
reaching the point and
more to go. I love how we were like, it's going to be 2 or 3 parts. It's 4.
Surprise for you and us.
Shawty.
But yeah, so we will pick up in the next episode with the employee sabotage and other things.
Yeah, so stay tuned.
So, see you then. And thanks for listening once again.
And bye.
Ciao.